Maybe one small question to start with from me for you, Brenda. I mean, the 4 challenges were clearly phrased, and I mean, if we should give advice to the 170 people or so tuning in today, are they equally important, or is there some hierarchical ordering of the challenges that you think some of them are more important than others?
I think that they are all equally important. They need to be tackled simultaneously. If we are to realize the radical change, the normative change that Chris is talking about, that we need to prioritize all this. I know if we have a bag of money and then you say, so where should we invest? It would really be challenging. But if I was told, okay, where should we really invest? Then I would say we need to be active on the ground. We need to get out of the policy and put action in place.
Yes, okay, that's clear. Maybe the word to Chris. Maybe any reflections you have on the talk that Brenda gave just now.
What Brenda has presented?
Yes, any things that stand out from your perspective?
Maybe 2 points. I think I fully agree with the challenge number 1, which is being able to learn from the past. Unfortunately, as she kind of suggests, we are not good at this. And beyond the example of the nutrition on the first 1,000 days, that may not have led to as many positive outcomes as we may have hoped initially. I think the other example I can think of is the tobacco industry. And for 30 years, the tobacco industry main actors had been able to push back major decision or intention by government using several different strategies. And what we are observing at the present time is that the big food actors are actually using the same similar type of strategy to delay or drag their feet in the necessary transformation of our food system. So it seems a bit paradoxical that we have not learned from what happened 30 or 50 years ago with the tobacco industry, and that we are reiterating the same mistake with the big food guys. The second slightly minor comment, I totally agree with one of the points she made, which is when people are not clear on the concept, that lead to reinterpretation of that concept, and that weaken the legitimacy of the concept itself. And I was sitting here this week with some colleagues here in Nairobi, and that's the point I was making about even the concept of transformation. I think everybody would agree that transformation is becoming that buzzword that basically everybody claiming that they are doing food system transformation. And I don't think we are serving ourselves by actually not being rigorous in when exactly we should be talking about transformation. Anyway, that was my 2 little points on Brenda's presentation. Back to you.
Thanks, Chris. Maybe, do you have any quick response to that, Brenda, or? No, not really. Okay, then. Maybe a question to you, Chris, about the, you mentioned the role of big food, right? And how they shape the debate. So, and the need, of course, I mean, how the debate has shifted towards normative transition or normative transformation. Could you think of any example where there has been an intended normative transformation of the food system despite big food companies being out there? Or do such examples do not exist in your experience or view?
I would say the food system transformation at the scale we need it has not yet happened. So we would, in theory, not have good example. What you see is some partial food system transformation at national level. For instance, increasing number of countries, especially in the Latin and South America, have intended through public policy to really challenge those big food actors. And here I'm referring to tax on sweet and beverage, which have been proven to influence the behavior of the consumers. The problem is that we are unable to show the long-term impact of those changing behavior. So we can see that Mexican Argentine people are consuming less of those sweet beverage, yet we don't see a reduction in the obesity in those countries. So how at the lower level, so at the national level, I don't think we can yet talk about any countries that have succeeded in their food system transformation. At a lower level, you have experience, and again, I was had the chance this week to listen to experience that are done at district level, where you have actually a series of different changes, starting with the communities, but involving also the district level in terms of policy, which is exactly what actually Brenda was saying, is at the lower level is where eventually the rubber hit the road, and this is where change are happening. So if you have a simultaneous change in both bottom up and top down, you may be lucky enough to see some change that are transformational at the lower level. I will stop here because I know we have plenty of things to discuss.
Oh, interesting. Thanks for that answer. Brenda, any responses you have on Chris's presentation or points that stood out from your view?
Be careful what you're going to say. Huh?
Yeah. So I like, when I listen to Chris's presentation, then you talk about we need to have a radical change, but then we also need to have to make it normative and also embed in the structures. So then I started thinking about, okay, so for the process of transformation, how possible is it to ensure that this process is radical and then normative at the same time for us to be able to have this change happening? For me, it doesn't, my understanding of how government systems operate, I see it's really a slow process there, that having this radical change and embedding it into institutions makes me a bit, ponder and think, how can we be able to achieve this? I like the fact that we are talking about the private sector, and in the presentation and all the issues that you have raised from the perspective of the private sector. And then I shouldn't be asking a question, but am I allowed to ask a question? This is about, Chris, you have examples where private sector and government, private sector and all the other stakeholders within the food systems, they are actually working together to be able to convert the negative effects into more positive effects for the food system. Because we seem to hear so much that, the private sector,
Okay, let me try to address those as quickly as possible so we can open up so you were trying to say that because food systems are so complex, we cannot hope to see changes happening so fast. Well, unfortunately, negative changes can happen very fast. I will give you one example. In Ghana, over the span of one generation, we passed from a country that was struggling with undernutrition for a major part of the population to a country which is now affected by overnutrition with a rate of obesity extremely high, in particular in the urban population. So over one generation, within 20 years, we have a country that passed, as I said, from a country where we were struggling about undernutrition to over. So change can happen even in food system very, very quickly. So that would be my first comment. Second, the role of private sector. First of all, we have to be extremely careful. Private sector is probably one of the most misleading terms. Private sector in food system is including the small and formal farmers all the way to the transnational corporation. So when we talk about the role of the private sector, if you don't, not you, but if people don't clarify what they mean by private sector, I say I can't answer. Because indeed, some of those actors are part of the problem and some of those might be part of the solution. So I think I would encourage people from now on, I'm talking to the participants of the presentation, to really think carefully, not carefully, but to really clarify when they use private sector in the sentence in relation to food system. Mm-hmm. Now, example of positive participation of the private sector. Well, again, what do you mean by private sector? Unfortunately, the only things I would say is that despite the attempt by some of the big transnational corporations to make us believe that they actually act on the behalf of the human health and nutrition and the well-being of people, they actually cannot prove that beyond the statement they made in their usual annual report. We know it's not happening at the present time. But you can find some of the private sector people who really strongly fight to actually move values and business model in the right direction. So again, I would not put everybody in the same basket, and I would definitely make sure that when we mention the private sector, remember what I tried to show in my presentation is that yes, okay, private sector is part of the problem, but I hope I have managed to show that the government are part of the problem and the consumers themselves are part of the problem. So it's not the good ones on one side and the bad one on the other. I think when we realize that we are all part of the problem, we will probably in better position to actually tackle that problem. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris and Brenda, for that question. There's lots of remarks in the. Many people comment that they like the presentations. Bram, can you help me out? There's one or two questions that stand out in the chat that we.
Yes, Ezra. There's a few that come back a few times. It's a broad question, but I think it's very relevant. Kafayat Adebayo asks, how can policy implementation be improved so that we get the desired positive outcomes? And Barbara also links to that. The general problem is often that there's good policies on paper, but when it comes to implementation on the grounds, there is no action. How best can policy implementation be achieved? And it's a hard question, but I'll let Chris and Brenda.
Yeah, well, I would make my usual black, joke, which is if I had the answer, I would probably be Nobel Prize of Economy. So obviously, I don't have the answer because I'm not yet Nobel Prize. No, this is exactly the point, and this is what actually Brenda was aiming at, which is, I give you one example. In Vietnam, for instance, they have a very comprehensive set of regulation on law regarding food safety. So at least the policy framework is in place. Where comes the problem is that when it comes to implementing those policies at the lower level where they don't have resources. But that's just one example amongst many, and I'm using a country in Asia, but I'm sure our colleagues from the different countries in Africa, it sounds very familiar to what they observe in their own countries. But that's not specific to food system. When you think of it, it's the same issues with climate change, is the same issues with environmental policies, is the same issue with health. The issue is that the way countries' governance are organized is that the allocation of resources does not actually reflect where actually interventions are made. That's a political economy issue.
Yeah.
Brenda, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I can give an example where of when we supported the local government to develop nutrition action plans. The question was also, so where is the funding going to come from to be able to implement these plans? And together with these local governments, we had a brainstorm session, and we asked them, so how do you usually mobilize your resources? Because they have the conditioned funding from government and then the unconditioned funding that comes in from other partners. And one of the things was, okay, we can mobilize the partners who work within our local government so that we have a resource pot that we know if they're covering this, we don't have to cover that activity. But there are also those who said, you know what, help us to understand how do we do resource mobilization. And then they went through a training of this is how you may advocate for resources for your local governments, how to write proposals to be able to do implementation for the local governments. And there are those who are able to, mobilize resources for them. But I also still feel implementation is always a challenge because of us maybe dreaming big and not really doing this prioritization when it comes to implementing our dreams.
Yes, and there's one comment in the chat which relates a bit to this by Oliver Maconigio. He says, I believe the core behavior to be addressed is the incentives. People don't have enough incentives to follow through with the food system transformation at all levels, which relates a bit to this, I suspect, right? The lack of incentives in the system to pursue transformation at different levels.
Yeah, but just let me put a nuance. Again, what has been described by Brenda and well recognized in governance science, which is those issues of making policies implementable and actually actionable at the local level, is not specific to the issue of the food system. The silo issues is something that basically science scholars that work on governance have been banging their head with for half a century. So we know that the silo issues is something that what is very specific to the food system is what I was mentioning, the high concentration of the market in the hand of very few people. That leads me to say that in addition to the normal usual complexity that we have to govern system on food system, comes that additional complexity, which is the fact that some actors have fantastic power. If you were aware of the numbers of hundreds of millions of dollars that every year is used to lobby by the industry, to lobby in particular the US representative chambers, you will be scared. The level of lobby by the food system in US is bigger than the quantity of lobby in the defense industry. So you're talking about, we have no clue, but we are actually controlled by very, very few people. So that's had a layer of complexity to what is the common issues of governing, which is around the silo. Because government are organized in silo, that's the only way we can operate. Yet the silo is the source of the problem.
Thanks for that nuance. But it's 30 past minutes. It's 3:30 sharp. I mean, we started a bit late, so maybe time for one last question, Bam. Can you highlight one from the chat or Miriam? Laila Africa saying this is the best session ever. Thank you very much. So maybe that's if there's no clear questions coming out, then probably let's call it a day here. And thank you, Chris and Brenda, for your presentation, for your input, for the nice discussion. And again, my thanks for freeing up some time in your busy schedules to be here today. Yes, and for all the participants, thank you for listening in, and keep up the good work with filling out the assignments in the curator, I would say.